Madam President, I recently received a letter from a man in Chicago. He was writing on behalf of his dad, who was a Vietnam War vet, and he was writing for hundreds of thousands of other veterans just like his dad. These people are sick with illnesses connected to their military service. These veterans served our nation in many different wars, many different places and many different times, different branches of the military. They have one thing in common. They were unknowingly poisoned with toxic chemicals during their service. They came home from war, thought they were safe. They managed to escape the fate of some of their colleagues. But years and sometimes decades later, they became sick with rare cancers, debilitating lung diseases, heart conditions, and other illnesses as a result of toxic exposure during their service. One veteran said it's like an IED that goes off in your body 8, 10, 20 years after you're out of the service. Al LaHood is not related to the congressman or the congressman's son, but he's a father who my constituent wrote to me about. Al was 22 years old when he was drafted into the Army and went to Vietnam in 1968. He was an infantryman, a machine gunner, stationed at Camp Cucci, northwest of Saigon. He came home after a year with a Bronze Star for Valor, but he brought something else home, although he wouldn't know it for almost 50 years. His body had absorbed Agent Orange, the toxic defoliant used by the U.S. military in Vietnam to clear the jungles. After his service, Al LaHood earned a college degree and an MBA, got married, had a family, the American dream. Every 2 years, he and his Army buddies made a point of having a reunion somewhere. One by one over the years, his buddies started getting sick. Heart disease, prostate cancer, esophageal cancer. Turns out all related to the toxic exposure to Agent Orange. 4 years ago, the toxic time bomb caught up with Al LaHood. He was diagnosed with a rare form of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Last year, even worse news, diagnosed with another rare cancer. Doctors tell him he has a 30% chance of surviving for 5 years. The VA ruled that his cancers are service-related and declared Al 100% disabled. It amazes him to think that he now receives more in disability compensation each month than he received in combat pay for an entire year in Vietnam. People don't understand the true cost of war, Al says. Exposure to toxic substance is not new. In World War I, it was mustard gas. World War II, exposure to nuclear tests. Vietnam, Agent Orange. In the Persian Gulf War and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a new form of exposure. It was called burn pits. Military dug massive pits, filled them with everything imaginable, from ruined Humvees and aircraft to medical waste, human waste, computers, batteries, plastics, every bit of trash produced in a war on a military base. Then they doused it all with jet fuel and lit it on fire. The thick black smoke from the fire contained invisible, deadly chemicals. They filled the air and covered everything around. And the soldiers, they breathed it into their lungs and into their bodies. Al LaHood's son said his dad was concerned for the veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. He hopes they receive early screening, so if they develop cancer, they just might be able to save their lives. Al and his family say they want more research into the kinds of rare cancers and other illnesses that toxic exposed veterans develop so they can be detected earlier. Al would give up gladly all of his disability payments if the money could be spent on research for illnesses that might hit his fellow victims exposed to toxic substances. I want Al LaHood and the hundreds of thousands of toxic exposed veterans, their families and caregivers to know. The United States Senate not only honors your service, we hear your voices. This week, the Senate is taking up Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson honoring our PACT Act. The PACT Act is the most important piece of veterans legislation in a generation. It's about keeping promises, the promises we made to veterans if they risked their lives for our nation and became wounded as a result. We would not leave them behind. They would have health care and benefits they needed and earned. The PACT Act builds on the historic Agent Orange Act. And let me at this point note that a friend of mine, now deceased, was one of the major movers on the Agent Orange Act of 1991. His name was Lane Evans. He was from the Quad Cities in Illinois, He and I were elected to the U.S. House in the same year, 1982. Lane was a Vietnam-era veteran who came back determined to help his fellow veterans, and he made Agent Orange his cause. He recognized that illnesses caused by Agent Orange are actually war wounds, should be treated that way. The PACT Act takes that principle that Congressman Lane Evans stood for and applies it to other situations. They apply it to all American veterans from all wars exposed to toxic chemicals during their service, whether overseas or in the U.S. And as we continue to learn about the cost of exposure, it provides a framework to add more conditions related to toxic exposure in the future. Veterans will no longer have to fight a second war with the VA to prove their illness was service-related. They can focus on fighting their disease instead of fighting the bureaucracy. It is estimated that the PACT Act will affect 1 out of every 5 veterans, 3.5 million veterans in all. The Act directs the VA to devote resources and personnel needed to process new claims and treat new patients. In another provision, which I strongly support, the PACT Act directs the VA to work collaboratively with the Department of Defense and Health and Human Services and EPA. A whole-of-government search for better ways to detect, treat, and cure these hidden, deadly wounds of war. Our veterans deserve nothing less. Now, I've heard some critics say, this is going to cost a lot of money. Right, it just might do that. But can you think of a more deserving cause? Can you think of anything better than for us to really face the true causes of war and to stand by our veterans? Madam President, you know that story far better than I do. I have long supported this whole-of-government approach to research, especially at the VA, and treatment for our veterans. Many VA researchers are veterans themselves, determined to find innovative treatment and cures. I commend Senator John Tester of Montana and Senator Jerry Moran, their chairman and ranking member of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, for their leadership in producing this excellent, timely, historic, bipartisan bill. I especially thank the more than 60 veteran service organizations like the VFW. I spoke to their statewide convention in Springfield just last Friday, and so many others that helped produce this bill, and the veterans who fought to reach this point, fought sometimes literally with their last breath. I'll vote proudly for the PACT Act, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.